Hi, I'm Dave Atkinson, and welcome to Life on the Strait. For this great adventure series, I'll be reading from my 3-volume book, The Yonder Years. I chose not to publish it, but there are links on my channel that will take you to a cloud drive where you can freely download the PDF files. The videos in this series will be providing a little more content than what is in the book. We're now in the third section titled Stuck in a Holding Pattern. If you've been following along, we need to stay in roughly the Pacific Northwest region of the country until at least November, when one of our problem tenants is due to vacate their spaces in a little business park that we own in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Before we head off to more distant parts of the country, we will first have to find a replacement tenant. That's okay, because even though Amy and I were born and raised around Seattle, there is much of the Pacific Northwest that we had yet to experience. As this episode begins, it is mid-September of 2014, and we are departing Central Oregon for a 2-week stay in the city of McMinnville, which sits 35 miles southwest of Portland. This will prove to be an excellent choice of a base camp from which to see many of Oregon's treasures. A good friend arriving from Seattle via Amtrak will also be staying with us for a week. Thank you for following Life on the Strait. If you enjoy this content, please subscribe to this channel, which is free, and like and share as well. And now, the Yonder Years. 173 miles northwest marked our next destination, Old Stone Village in McMinnville, Oregon, which lie between Salem and Portland. We would be spending the next 2 weeks there. Our route took us through the city of Sisters, which is a cute little town along the lines of Joseph, McCall, and Kimberly. We didn't stop to investigate, and the place was packed with tourists, but fate would bring us together several years later. Old Stone Village was an immaculate RV resort. Everything was either paved or landscaped. The coolest thing was that it was just a short footpath away from the massive and sprawling Evergreen Air and Space Museum. How massive, you ask? The museum features an indoor water park that has a full-size Boeing 747 airplane mounted on the roof, with slides coming out of the aircraft leading down to pools within the building, and that is the smallest building. After we got G2 all set up and connected, we found a Mexican restaurant about 5 miles away in the city shopping section and had some dinner. On the way to McMinnville from Sun River, the wiring harness between G2 and the Honda had somehow come loose and dragged on the road, exposing some of the wires. The next day I needed to find a replacement harness, and I found one at a Camping World store in Hillsboro, which was 30 miles away. Once again, a navigation aid, and in this time Honda's built-in nav system, got me into trouble. It started out good, and then I found myself navigating gravel and then dirt paths, winding through vineyards and orchards as the nav system was trying to guide me home using the most direct route. Yes, it probably shaved a mile or so off the distance, but it increased the time by maybe 45 minutes as I had to creep along primitive washboard roads. Live and learn. The next day was a most enjoyable day for me, being a space and aviation buff. We walked over to the nearby museum and spent the entire day there, including lunch. What a place! It consisted of 2 absolutely massive hangars, one for space and the other for aviation, with a theater complex in between and a water park off to one side. Featuring an incredible array of exhibits on the floor and suspended from the ceiling One could easily spend a week in this place. I won't go on about everything that was there except to say that it included Howard Hughes' infamous Spruce Goose, which dominated the aviation hangar. They didn't have anything playing in the theater building when we were there, so that was a little bit of a letdown, but overall it was a great day of wonderment. We returned to the McMinnville Walmart the following day and stumbled upon an interesting peculiarity of living in Oregon. Unlike our home state of Washington, in Oregon, most beverage containers, and that would be cans and bottles, were returnable. At the checkout, you had to pay a fee for each container, and to recover that fee, you would feed the empty containers into a machine inside the store, and it was where the shopping baskets were stored. Of course, we had some bottles from Washington and Idaho that we tried to recycle, but the containers didn't have the magic code, and they hung up the machine for a bit. The machine was extremely slow, noisy, and filthy. The Oregon legislature passed an act called the Bottle Bill. Personally, they could have it. On the 18th, we were headed into Tigard, and it might be pronounced Tigard, which is a suburb of Portland. We stopped at the Washington Square Shopping Mall, which was a very upscale store. It housed both an Apple and a Tesla store. We picked up some additional bedding items, including a down comforter for G2's guest bed, a backpack, and some groceries. The next day, I took our Honda in for its 10,000 mile scheduled service, and wow, that didn't take long. I should note that when being towed, the Honda's odometer doesn't move. My brother Eric and his wife Debbie ventured down from Vancouver, Washington to visit us, which was a real treat. We hadn't seen either of them for years, and they got to look at G2 for the first time. On the 20th, we decided to walk back over to the museum. Rather than pay the entrance fee again, we just walked around the complex looking at all of the outdoor exhibits. We also poked our heads inside the water park building just to see what it looked like. A little removed from the theme, out in the back they had an exhibit of armored vehicles, tanks, troop carriers, and the like. Also out back was a beautiful log cabin structure that they called the Evergreen Chapel. Apparently people can hold their weddings at this building. We wrapped up the day with dinner at the Golden Valley Brewery Brewpub in downtown McMinnville, and that was a big thumbs up. The next day we drove out to the coast to a small town called Pacific City. Just north of the city was another Thousand Trails campground, our next destination. We wanted to look it over before we arrived to scout out the best campsites. We had lunch at a little store and deli near the ocean, and then returned to McMinnville. And that was about a 110-mile day of traveling. An interesting element about being out here on the road full-time is that certain tasks or chores that used to be routine were now different. Haircuts and dental work are what I'm getting to here. Amy and I used to have the same hairstylist and the same dentist all the time, but that was no longer the case. Both of us needed to tend to both items, so that is what we did on the 22nd. One thing we noticed is that if you're not a regular customer, and that goes for Buzzy's vet appointments as well, you pay through the nose. Before we left Kingston, having our teeth cleaned was $110 each. In McMinnville, we paid $420 for both of us. For haircuts, we figured that we'd just go with a chain, such as Hairmasters. We hung around the campground or just went into town for shopping over the next few days, but on the 25th, we drove to Portland's downtown Amtrak station to pick up our friend Anna. She had never slept in or traveled in a motorhome before, so this is going to be a whole new experience for her. We were wondering which bed Buzzy would be sleeping in during the duration of our stay. Hours, it turned out, since we shut our sliding door in case Anna needed to use the restroom during the night. The next 2 days kept us busy. For the first day, we traveled to McMinnville Falls, the most popular natural recreation site in the Pacific Northwest. A wonderful setting has the waterfall set back against the historic lodge, with trails leading up to the Benson Bridge that crosses over the falls and gives tourists a fantastic vantage point of the upper and lower falls. After lunch in the lodge, we headed back to the Vista House, which sits high above the Columbia River. They chose the perfect name for this place, as the vistas went out for miles in every direction. On the 27th, we all went to the Oregon Zoo, which is located up in the highlands west of downtown Portland. This is our first time visiting this zoo, and it was on par with the zoos in Seattle and Tacoma. It was quite a bit better than Boise. Like the Raptor Center we visited near Boise, the Oregon Zoo also had a condor. Amy and Anna had a good time feeding nectar to the colorful birds in the aviary. Afterwards, we drove to where an old co-worker of Amy's and Anna's, Jean, lived in a nearby neighborhood along with her husband Alan, and visited with them over dinner. If you've never spent time driving in a big motorhome, it is really a treat. G2 had this massive one-piece windshield along with ample side windows, and sitting high above the road, you enjoy a view that you just cannot get in a car. We were only traveling a short 67 miles, and Amy let Anna sit up front in the passenger chair. Arriving at the Pacific City RV and Camping Resort, a Thousand Trails resort, we found a somewhat cramped but adequate site that was close to a path that led across the road and down to the beach. If memory serves, I believe that we were able to snag a campsite that had sewer, but only 30 amp power. This was another large, and that means 305 campsites large, resort, but it was not on par with the Thousand Trails resort in Sun River. The resort was spread out over a hillside, and as I mentioned, the campsites were all right next to each other. We saw quite a few RVs that were obviously permanent homes for those barely getting by. But on the bright side, there were rabbits all over the place, everywhere. We would toss out a carrot or piece of lettuce and watch them munch away right outside the door. We would make it our home over the next 2 weeks. We soon discovered that there was no AT&T cellular service. We ended up going into town to a little coffee shop that offered Wi-Fi in order to access the internet as well as make phone calls over the internet. One of the reasons that we liked heading into town, other than getting coffee and pastries, was that we passed a motel that always had at least 2 black baby bunnies hopping around on the lawn. Now that we had Anna with us until the 3rd, we had a packed itinerary in store. But first, a few words about friends and family. In this day, so many families and friends are spread out across the country, and they all are living their own lives. They don't always have the free time to travel around and connect with others. On our adventure, we not only wished to visit new places and see new things, but we wanted to also meet up with our peeps, as well as to make new friends. Just 4 months into our trip, we met up with my brother and his wife, their son and his family, another brother of mine, and his wife, our friend Anna, who would be traveling with us, and another friend and her husband who used to work with Amy and Anna, a couple from Ohio who were new friends that we would later meet up with, and a couple from Canada that we would stay in constant email contact with. And our little 4-legged traveling companion, Buzzy, would make new friends wherever he would go. On the final day of September, we headed south to Newport to visit the impressive Oregon Coast Aquarium. The aquarium is located on a Yaquina Bay and is south of Oregon Coast Natural Wildlife Refuge. Yaquina Bay is a busy place for marine traffic, with fishing boats, and that would be fish, crab, and shellfish, coming and going, and with seafood processing plants and restaurants lining the northern shore. The aquarium is an impressive collection of indoor and outdoor exhibits. We enjoyed their Passages of the Deep, with its underwater tunnels where we could watch sharks and other fish swim all around us. We also enjoyed the playful sea otters in the outdoor exhibits. We enjoyed a fish and chips lunch at Moe's on the north side of the bay, and then headed back to Pacific City. On the way back, the highway went through the oceanside town of Depot Bay, and there was a crowd gathered along the rock wall that looks down upon the frothy ocean slamming up against the rocks. We parked and got out to see what all the fuss was about, and it turned out to be a baby whale. Seems as if the little one wanted to get up close and personal with people watching him or her. "There it is," or "Look over there," with fingers pointing here and there as the whale moved about in the turbulent bay. What an unexpected joy to witness, but it was too quick for a photo, however. Our next day's outing took us north to the city of Tillamook, a place we had visited back in February. We wanted to take Anna on the factory tour, so we all did that as well as visited the nearby French Cheese Company. Outside of their store were gardens and animals to enjoy. Amy and Anna became instant friends with a donkey, a llama, a sheep, and some guinea hens. We drove over to the nearby community of Oceanside in order to get a good look at the Three Arch Rocks National Wildlife Refuge. We also drove down Whiskey Creek Road on the east side of Netarts Bay, where we stopped to look at the distant beach that was packed with resting sea lions. The weather was spot on perfect. We all had a great lunch in Tillamook at the Pelican Brewing Company brew pub before returning to our campsite. With one final day left to travel with Anna before we would have to drive her back to Portland to catch the Amtrak, we headed further north to Cannon Beach and Seaside. It was just a day spent walking the streets, the beaches, the promenade and Seaside, and Arcadia Beach south of Cannon Beach, with lunch from the Safeway store in Seaside. Then it was back to camp. We took Anna back to Portland on October 3rd. The trips to pick her up in Portland, to take her back, and every place we went to in between amounted to around 850 miles of driving. And that didn't include moving our campsite from McMinnville to Pacific City. At the end of our adventure, we would end up driving several thousand more miles in our Honda than we logged driving both motorhomes. When you're out seeing the sights, it is amazing how quickly the miles add up. After we dropped Anna off at the train depot, we took the opportunity of going to Costco to buy some groceries before heading back to remote Pacific City. For the next few days, we stuck close to home, spending time walking the beach and the huge sand dune that spilled down from the north into Pacific City. We took Buzzy to the beach in his carrier and with his collar and leash on him. Not that he was going anywhere, he was content to stay in his carrier with the front flap down so he could see the seagulls and give them a piece of his mind. We were able to drive down onto the beach, which made it easier to bring him with us. Pelican Brewery has a brew pub right on the beach in Pacific City, so we had dinner one night while we watched the Seahawks football game on their TV. On the 7th, we took a little 10-mile drive north to Cape Lookout State Park. There were several hiking trails, but we chose the 5-mile round-trip Cape Trail, which took us out to the very end of Cape Lookout. The trail was mostly easy, but at times difficult, with some steep terrain combined with wet, slippery clay. It was a sunny day when we began, but by the time we reached the tip, everything was fogged in. Rack it up to "The journey is the reward." The hike was still a lot of fun, and we had plenty of company on the trail. On the 9th, we visited the nearby Nestucca Bay National Wildlife Refuge. We learned that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service works with farmers to manage the fields in and around the refuge, apparently just as they did when we visited the refuge outside of Bonners Ferry, Idaho. Migratory geese prefer fields with short grass in the winter, so farmers let their cattle graze in the fields, basically acting as nature's lawnmowers.